that happens. Which I won't, I promise. I promise. But welcome to our first luncheon meeting of 2023, as we are going into AOI's 158th year as an organization. So I will officially call our meeting to order. If you take a look at your November newsletter and online, which we have everything online on AOI's website, we have a recap of our November meeting that was included in there. And you will be able to watch that at any time on our AOI website as well, and our YouTube channel. So look for our new YouTube channel as well if you haven't had a chance to check that out. So if there are no additions or corrections from the floor, I'm going to say that that will serve as our official account of the meeting for our archives, our November meeting. Objections, comments, concerns? No, we're good. All right. I wasn't sure I was going to expect any, but I'm glad there are none. On that note, I'm going to turn it very quickly over to Carol and Michelle for our membership report and our treasurer's report.
Can you hear me? No? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Really hear me. Well, treasurer's report. Oh, stand up. Sorry. I'm Carolyn Michelle, treasurer of AOI DC, for those who don't know me. Treasurer's report, short and sweet. We have about $7,000 in our operating budget, our operating account. And thanks to those that have paid their dues, our coffers have been restored from last year. Those who have not paid their dues, please do so that we can meet our expenses. We've have budgeted expenses throughout the year, and the membership dues helps to pay for our expenses. Now moving on, putting on my membership chair hat. We have, since January, one reinstatement. Ed and Carol Kaminsky, are they here?
Yes, they are.
Oh, please stand. They were members, and they were members, and they reinstated their membership. Ed, let's see, if I can read. They're both retired, and they lived on the Capitol Riverfront.
No.
Ed was a neighborhood advisory commissioner
Yes.
when he joined AOI, and he actually was instrumental in relocating AOI to from the Channel Inn, our meetings from the Channel Inn to the Capitol Skyline Hotel. Thank you for that.
Yay.
And in his application for reinstatement, he said he thinks that AOI is a wonderful organization.
But we live in Philadelphia now, so we're here. We wanted to get back into our AOI club.
Well, we all agree with you.
Wonderful.
Jim Davis, who can't be here with us, he's an associate. He joined as an associate member. He's not, well, he was born at Columbia Women's Hospital in the late 50s, but grew up elsewhere. He found out about AOI when he was doing his genealogy and found that he was a descendant of Alonzo Francis Getty, who joined AOI in 1924.
Oh my goodness.
So new net members are Ellen Spencer. Is she here? I think she emailed me that she wouldn't be able to make it. Retired, has lived in DC for at least 20 years, learned of AOI through the Eldridges, and she attended our New Year's Day brunch and liked the company so much she wanted to join. So welcome, Ellen. And then Carol Groves. She's here. Here? She's a retired healthcare executive, has lived in DC for over 20 years, and heard about AOI from our member Richard Stamp. So welcome, warm welcome to everybody. Are there any visitors today that might like to introduce themselves?
Brian Beatty. I'm here with Anna who's invited me, told me some great things about you, so I wanted to speak for myself.
Any new member, any other visitors that would like to introduce themselves? Shy people. Well, I hand the floor back to our president.
Thanks. Well, welcome to everybody who's here, guests and members, old members, new members alike. Thanks so much for coming. And anybody else want, I know, the spotlight on anybody else? Going once, going twice? You know, now you can sit back and enjoy your chocolate cake, which has been staring at you for about an hour, and finally get to that as you're eating. I'm going to pass the baton straight back to our secretary, Rick Marino, so that he can walk us through adopting some of our bylaw amendments.
Cindy, could you have Rick come to the podium to do
I will
this?
have Rick come to the podium.
Easier for me.
He also works here.
So we did want to make a few changes to the bylaws that were last revised in 2007. You all had gotten that through the email, and just to give you a quick synopsis, we made a few grammatical changes, a couple of things to streamline some of the things that had already said. But the two basic changes we made, one was to who could be eligible to be member of the board, and we included associate members as well as regular members, so we have a larger pool of people to select from to become a member of the board. And the other big change was to give the treasurer more flexibility in what they can do as far as paying bills and dealing with the financial aspects of the organization, simply bringing it up to date to a more modern time. So what we want to do here is we need a motion from the floor to accept the changes to the bylaws. Anybody? And a second. All those in favor of the changes? Aye. Anybody opposed? There we go. Thank you very much.
Get our business done fast. So we can get to the good stuff. One more kind of business note. We are in search of somebody to help out with membership at AOI. We currently have several different board members who are working on the membership committee, and we'd like to reform that as a separate committee. That's part of our changing some of the duties for the officers that we did that we made for the bylaws. So if there is somebody, one of you perhaps, who have the organizational and communication skills that we would covet for that type of a position. We promise you would not be doing it on your own. There are many shared duties to that. It's not particularly time intensive, but we do need somebody that would help us focus our energies on making sure that we keep not only our current membership up to date and have that for the archives, but also for recruiting and finding new members and ways to reach out to the community. So please contact myself, contact Rick, contact Carolyn, Bill, John, any of the other board members that are here, or send us an email and we will follow up with you probably very quickly if you do reach out to us. But please, if you're willing to do that for us, we would love to talk to you about that. Next, Nelson, I believe might have some trivia for us today.
From time to time, there's a lot of discussion develops about amending the Building Height Act of 1910 and the earlier acts. The mayor is proposing now to make major changes. She's going to approach Congress to make major changes in the building height regulations and laws of the District of Columbia. Does anybody here know about what she's about? This has all been kind of kept under the table. I don't know myself. I was hoping that somebody here might just be able to give us a very brief idea of what the mayor has in mind.
Oh, there was a post article.
She has a program now, which I have just learned about, haven't looked it up on the web yet. Something like Come Back, DC. Anyway, she's very anxious to, as are some of our other city leaders, to revitalize our downtown, and this is part of it. Oh, thank you. The mayor is very anxious to revitalize our downtown, and that means hopefully she would like to see federal employees be told they have to come back to the office. But she also wants to increase housing in the downtown area. And part of that, you know, she believes would require raising the height limit, so you can have more housing, more dense developments downtown, because you can go up instead of out. But that's why she's wanting this change to the height limitations.
Again, it's not clear whether she wants a blank authority to change it, or she has specific heights in mind in certain areas of the city. She's keeping all that very close to her chest, which is dangerous. Because once we start monkeying with the House laws and opening it up, who knows what will happen. Now, the Secret Service has been very concerned about heights downtown, and they should be consulted very closely by off the record. They don't like to go on the record about this, but they're very concerned about areas around the White House, the Capitol, and the Vice President's house now. And in the past, the city hasn't shown much interest in the Secret Service and their concerns. They allowed a building to go up near the White House that was 30 feet above the allowable height. And the Secret Service protested behind the scenes and wrote a letter, and the city ignored it and did not inform Congress of the Secret Service's concerns. So, stay tuned. Yes?
Anyway, Nelson, there was a big, huge, long article about 2 weeks ago in the Post, which explained it all, what she was trying to do. But there is a committee on Capitol Hill, which is oversight for that, and they're against it. The other thing is, there is a letter writing campaign into that committee, and I can't remember who's chairing it, because it's the new Congress. So if anybody's opposed to it, send them a letter. The second thing is, right now there are 3 major office buildings in D.C. One was occupied by Coakley Williams, I think, or some big law firm, that are under change to residential. And there's 12 more applications in the city now for office buildings to be converted to residential. So you can see the downtown is still not more than 40–50% occupied during the day.
And I might add that the mayor is dismissing and not taking advantage of Republican proposal on the Hill. They got it past the House to demand that the public employees come back downtown in their offices. And the mayor has been trying to get President Biden to do this by executive order, as has Eleanor Holmes Norton. Now that the Republicans have come out against it, they're against it. We can't win. We've developed in this city a political environment with you're for it, we're against it. You're for it, we're against it. And this is poison. And it affects our local government and our situation here very, very severely. And so stay tuned. My trivia question, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I live near the Vice President's house, and in the last couple of decades, when they were putting up condos or commercial, the Secret Service has weighed in, and I think they've gone along with them. So it's not very public, but they wanted to make them higher overlooking the
Patricia Clark.
observatory.
Hey, who's kicking my
Okay, well,
stand.
the White House is seriously jeopardy of this now when they allowed the Metropolitan Square project to go up. And that the Secret Service was totally ignored in that case. And so, and this goes to the whole issue of statehood. We're talking about statehood? No. They would have complete control over everything in the development of the city. And that's not what the District of Columbia was set up to do under the Constitution. And so, as I say, take two. My trivia question is, the first, I have some information on this that I can hand out that you can read later on. We'll get to the details. President Washington issued the first building height regulations for the city in 1791. Does anybody know what the maximum height was under those regulations?
Because he stumped everybody.
It's under 100 feet, I'll give you that clue. But now I'll give you the other half of that. What is the maximum today under the building? You have an answer? 90? No, that's...
530.
No. Pardon?
550?
No, oh boy. Bring George back. They love him.
13 stories.
No. Now this is way back, when construction.
I don't want his stuff.
Well, the current, you said what?
13 stories.
How many feet? Well,
That's 8.
okay, well, I guess I'll give it to you.
Yeah.
It's 160 feet.
Oh, 160.
And it can really, we've had them up to 15 stories under that, the way they measure the basement and so on and so forth. But that's basically 160 feet.
Nelson, I'm sorry, he said
He had it
it
too?
wasn't loud enough.
He had it first?
Yes, it is.
Oh, no. Oh, no. Well, maybe you can negotiate. I have a big prize here. Maybe you can divide it. It has a lot of stuff in it. I have 2 beers, for example. You can each have a beer. I also wanted to add that in my prize that I have some old license plates. And I found out doing some research lately, until 1955, license plates, which were originally issued for cars in the 1890s, didn't have District of Columbia on there, didn't have Washington, D.C., didn't have nation's capital. They just had D.C. Very simple. We were just D.C. for how many years? 50, 80 years or something like that on our license plates. Now we're getting into another issue. Are we going to have the Douglas Commonwealth license plate? Is that next? We'll see.
Well, they're not going to be here talking about height limits, though I think they probably could, since both of our speakers are well-versed in preservation in D.C. But we are going to switch from height limits to get to what is behind me here on the screen. We, AOI, love these 2 speakers. We love them and we keep having them back. Not only are they terrific speakers, but their subject matter, their research, their scholarship on DC, not only is it accessible and available in several books between them, but it has expanded our knowledge of both DC history as well as the way we look and think about DC history into many, many different arenas, not just the way I think that most people think about DC, which is outside of DC, which is the kind of political history of DC. So really getting into the local. Our speakers today are Peter Sefton and John DeFerrari. For those of you who were not here to catch one of their previous presentations, we're going to do a little introduction, just to make sure that a quick reminder of their background. John is a DC native. His master's degree in English literature from Harvard has come in handy and is evident in his absolutely wonderful blog, The Streets of Washington, as well as his 4 books on DC, including Lost Washington, Historic Restaurants of Washington, and Capital Streetcars, which was a subject, I believe, of his last talk to us. He is also a trustee of the DC Preservation League and serves as review editor of Washington History, the magazine of the DC History Center. Peter, while not native, it's close, he has adopted our city, came to DC to attend GW and now considers this his home. He earned his master's degree in architecture from UVA and has been active in historic preservation since the early 2000s. He also serves as a trustee of the DC Preservation League. He's author of Mid-Century Modern Churches of Southwest Washington, D.C., and he last spoke to us about the architect Nathan Wyatt and the Recorder of Deeds building in this past June. Today they're going to be talking about their book that they co-authored on 16th Street, which is available in beautiful hardcover at the back of the room, which you can buy today and have signed today as well. It is especially interest not only because of history for us in DC, but the connection for AOI with last year's dedication, finally, after several years' work of several of our members of the, I want to make sure I get this right, is the DC 16th Street Tree War Memorial Commemorative Wayside. Which is a mouthful, but it does say it all, to commemorate DC residents who fought in World War I. So that is up, and if you take the book and explore 16th Street more, take a look for our AOI plaque as well. And I'm going to introduce them now. So Mr. DeFerrari and Mr. Sefton, for you. Thank you.
Ready to go.
Okay, pleasure. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, I'm Peter Sefton, as Cindy said, and we wanted to thank you so much for having John and I over to talk about our book, 16th Street, on 16th Street, which is quite a labor of love. I'm going to dive right in because we have a lot to cover here, and my title is a little bit faint on screen, I think, so I'll repeat it. It's The Ghost of Meridian Hill. And today, Mary Foote Henderson's life is the stuff of everything from legends to punchlines. More than 90 years after her death, she lives on through her impression on the landscape. And we might say that really her ghost is whispering to us invisibly, suggesting that architectural aesthetics can reshape society. This afternoon, John and I hope to sketch how this conflicted and very often quixotic visionary brought her vision to 16th Street, and at what price to whom this was accomplished. Mary was born in 1842 in Seneca Falls, New York, where her father, Elisha Foote, was district attorney and president of the village. Besides his law office, the Foote house had a laboratory, which Elisha shared with his wife, Eunice Newton Foote. And in the last 10 years, Mary's mother Eunice has become world famous. Although she had no known scientific training that was formal, she devised an ingenious experiment that compared the temperature of compressed gases under sunlight. And she presented her observations of what today is considered the first scientific description of what's called the greenhouse effect. As a woman, she was not permitted to deliver her paper at the 1856 American Association for the Advancement of Science Conference. However, it was read by the Secretary of the Smithsonian, Joseph Henry, who remarked, quote unquote, "The sphere of woman embraces not only the beautiful and the useful, but the true." Mary's parents were progressive as well as inventive, and the Footes attended the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention that was chaired by their friend and neighbor, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And each of them signed this declaration of sentiments which demanded that women, quote unquote, have immediate admission to all the rights and privileges which belong to them as citizens of these United States. And on the slides you can see the arrows in red there point to the Footes' names. Elisha Foote signed right over Frederick Douglass. But after Mary turned 17, the Footes moved to Saratoga, which was a little bit bigger town, where she attended the precursor of Skidmore College. And in 1865 she came to Washington, where her father became a patent examiner. He would later become Commissioner of Patents.
Here, oh,
Did I erase it completely? Seems like it.
no.
There he is. John's back. In the spring of 1868, as the Capitol plunged into the bruising impeachment battle between President Andrew Johnson and his fellow Republicans, newspapers were diverted by reports of a romance between Missouri Senator John Henderson and a much younger lady, who eventually became revealed to be Mary Foote. The politically mercurial Henderson was more than 15 years Mary's senior, and he had owned slaves and run for Congress as a Democrat in 1860. However, he had strongly opposed the idea of secession from the Union, and he was elected to the Senate as a Republican in 1862 from Missouri. Missouri was a critical state. The Union had to hold it because of its forts and its railroads and its river, control of the Mississippi River. So he was a must-have, and he became very close confidant of President Lincoln. At any rate, in 1864, he co-authored and co-sponsored the Senate resolution that became the 13th Amendment, which abolishes slavery. President Johnson's impeachment trial in May 1868 unfolded just weeks before John and Mary were due to be married. And the president avoided conviction by just one vote, with John Henderson among the 7 Republican senators who voted not guilty on all counts. And newspapers reported that Mary had called off the wedding in disgust. But that's really actually was probably a short spat, because on June 25th, John and Mary were married at the National Hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue before a bunch of congressional delegations, cabinet officials, and even a Supreme Court justice. That November, though, John lost his Senate seat in the political firestorm over his impeachment vote. And he was determined to rebuild his fortunes, and he moved his family back to Missouri. And accustomed to city life and closely bound to her own family, Mary must have found the transition to Pike County, Missouri, like a really wrenching experience.
I have to reboot the computer, Peter. Just hold off 1 second.
Okay.
Not me.
See, the old battery wasn't so bad now. The old technology.
We'll get the stage crew right on it or something. With AV Club.
All right. Well, as you can see, Mary Henderson is going to figure very large in our story today. And we were kind of drawn to her because she's the kind of person that I think what we liked about her story, and there are a lot of things not to like too, frankly, but was that many people think they know everything there is to know about her. We did probably when we started the book, and we found out that we hadn't really scratched the surface. So I'm hoping what we have today is a surprise to everybody, and makes her a little bit more of a known figure.
Technology. There we go.
All right, can I hit the forward or? All right. All right, we just finished with John. All right.
There we go.
So often Mary Henderson's decades away from Washington seem like blank pages in her life story, but her travails really helped forge her future crusades. And compounded her cultural shock at moving to Missouri was the sickliness of the Hendersons' eldest child and the death of their youngest daughter from measles. And then John Henderson's 1872 comeback campaign for governor of Missouri just ended in a stinging defeat, absolute landslide. And afterwards, the family settled in St. Louis, where John practiced law and became wealthy through speculations in very highly discounted Civil War bonds. He was good making money. But from their elegant city home, Mary Henderson embarked on a career of activism. She helped launch an association that lobbied for women's suffrage to be added to the Missouri State Constitution. And she studied art. She co-founded a design school. And she published her first book, which was a guide to entertaining. She also became involved in charitable work that aided poor women and children. It was kind of a precursor of the settlement house movement. In the 1880s, though, tragedy again struck the family. The Hendersons' third child passed from rambunctious spirits to an agonized death in just a couple of days. Mary at first speculated that her son had been sickened by eating cheese. And soon afterwards, she wrote a book called Diet for the Sick, which sketched a very holistic view of the relationship between food and disease. A little incoherent today, but that idea is certainly one we would embrace today. Meanwhile, John Henderson, who was nearing age 60, remained a fiery political maverick, and he twice brawled with opposing attorneys in the courtroom. He broke one lawyer's hand by picking him up and throwing him into a radiator. And his public criticisms, President Grant pleased some Republicans, and he kind of started to clamber back onto the national stage. And in 1884, he got a great gig. He adroitly presided over the Republican National Convention. And although the Democrats won, and that squelched any hope of an executive appointment, the Hendersons began planning to return to Washington and relaunch themselves. By 1887, the Hendersons were lodged in a Washington hotel, and they were searching for a site to reestablish themselves in a really impressive house. The sparsely developed lower slopes of Meridian Hill, which you see here, above the eventual site of their castle, offered an absolutely superb vantage point of the mansions on lower 16th Street, and it was also seemed like a great investment opportunity. And John Henderson purchased several lots along Meridian Avenue, which you see on the slide. It was a long, narrow road that would later become the extension of 16th Street. Even before the house was underway in 1888, he joined other well-to-do landowners in the neighborhood in forming what was called the Meridian Hill Improvement Association to lobby Congress for better infrastructure in what was an area really in the county of Washington beyond the city line. And the Hendersons presumably hired New England architect Eugene Gardner to design a house that would conspicuously proclaim them as present in Washington and advertise their power over the landscape. Gardner was a very accomplished designer of country villas, and he was nationally famous for writing a bestseller that told how a wife's clear-headed analysis of household functions overcame her husband's truly dysfunctional design preferences. I think that appealed to Mary. At any rate, Boundary Castle began as a 6-acre estate with a Seneca sandstone mansion with an imposing central tower that overlooked the neighborhood from the lower slopes of the hill. And though it was reputedly modeled after a castle Mary had seen on the Rhine, it took really a decade to evolve into like its full faux medieval form. In 1882, it sprawled westward when architect T. Franklin Snyder added a huge service wing that had crenellated battlements. And similar castle-like battlements were added to the main house in 1902, and then it truly had become a castle. The Hendersons settled into their grand mansion as they pursued myriad social and political causes, sometimes collaboratively. In 1896, after John signed Mary's anti-vivisection petition, she returned the favor by writing a popular pamphlet that endorsed the gold standard. And although John remained a Republican older statesman, he soon proclaimed himself to be more interested in religion than politics, and he never again held high office. He busied himself, though, with subdividing a very large tract of land in downtown St. Louis and managing his 100-acre country estate in Arlington. It's in Boston, actually, today. And there he built an enormous chateau-like second home. It was there until the 50s. Some of you might remember it. At any rate, Mary established herself as a hostess with a castle for her stage. And after the Hendersons' first formal dinner, the Post marveled at the castle's mellow, Moorish entrance hall, as they termed it, its plush-lined picture gallery, and the grand oak dining room that was hung with embroidered tapestries. Mary's formal dinner parties were alcohol-free and strictly vegetarian. She served mock salmon and broiled slices of a meat that was really made out of peanut butter, wheat gluten, and cornstarch that was prepared by an accomplished English chef. It was different. She remained an impassioned evangelist for diet as destiny. Her 1904 book, The Aristocracy of Health, begins by proclaiming, quote-unquote, the human race is sick, and added, the violation of hygienic laws that has been so general and long prevailing that human degeneracy has come to be accepted as the appointed. She's pretty apocalyptic. In 1906, Mary famously decided to dispose of the castle's very extensive wine cellar. And armfuls of bottles were smashed on a huge rock on the front lawn, and wine ran down the gutters of 16th Street. In what was probably this castle's signature moment. It was near this time that 80-year-old John Henderson became chronically ill, and he disappeared from public view until his death in 1913. But shortly before he fell ill, Mary Henderson's most ambitious crusade began to take wing. Neighborhood development had been on the Hendersons' minds really virtually from the day they moved in. And while they were seeking municipal improvements, the all-white group of property owners that John presided over campaigned against its neighbors. At an 1899 meeting at the castle, it adopted a resolution that stated, "We have reason to complain of the dilapidated, dangerous, and unhealthy shanties. This territory is a disgrace to the city, and it is becoming a public nuisance which should be abated by the authorities." Mary Henderson carried this idea forward in John's illness and beyond through a very long crusade to make Meridian Hill attractive parks, majestic houses, and monumental public buildings. These kind of embodied the spirit of the City Beautiful movement, which we're going to hear more about in a couple minutes. But her campaign that really absorbed most of her energy for the rest of her life had three major facets. John will talk about the one that has the most impressive legacy, I think, and that's the magnificent mansions that were going to transform Meridian Hill into a new Embassy Row. Mary's second campaign, it was a related effort to make Meridian Hill Washington's monumental center by erecting grand civic buildings like the new White House you see up there, and rebranding 16th Street as Avenue of the Presidents. Essentially has ended up to be a memorial to her own hubris. But her third campaign was creating Meridian Hill Park as the focal point of the district. She first advocated this to Congress in 1906, and it remained incomplete when she died in 1931. But while the park is an aesthetic triumph, her crusade succeeded at a terrible cost to a particular community. Just after the Civil War, much of the park's footprint had been subdivided into small lots, and had become home to a working-class, predominantly African-American community. The Meridian Hill Subdivision included modest frame houses, as you see here, and some larger institutions like the Wayland Baptist Seminary. And building the park put the power of the government behind dispersing its residents. Although some attempted to save their homes, the last houses were condemned in 1912. Mary had no reservations and no regrets. As you see on the screen in that quote there, she told the New York Times that the subdivision had represented civic blight and neglect. And this was wildly inaccurate, as the photographs, as you see, show well-maintained houses in a community that had existed long before Mary's castle was built. Even at the time of this interview, it was becoming evident that though Mary Henderson had won the battle for the park, she'd lose her war for 16th Street's soul. She had turned 80 in 1922, and she was becoming extremely and increasingly isolated. Her son John wrote his mother earnest letters that advocated selling family landholdings to liquidate what he called the debt that hangs over us like a funnel-shaped cloud, and to redecorate the castle's dated and shabby Great Hall that was becoming an embarrassment. In the early 1920s, Mary had taken in a young immigrant from Okinawa she had met at an embassy party. And after her son died suddenly in 1923, she made him the manager of her business affairs and major domo of the castle, and even the host at her parties. Mary continued to write letters to newspapers on topics as varied as public architecture, women's bathing suits, and mediating's relationship to cancer. But as her civic engagements dwindled, her causes seemed more the expressions of a very eccentric personality than somebody with bold urban visions. And even at her peak influence, she had struck some people as grandiose and pretentious to the point of becoming ridiculous. And now, when newspaper articles mentioned her, they always seemed to weave in the day that the gutters ran red with claret and burgundy. And the castle's swimming pool, which was the city's first private home, and the tennis bets that were hosted by her granddaughter became much greater attractions than her dinners. Her death in 1931 was followed by a long probate fight involving her adopted granddaughter, who she had disinherited in a spat and just wrote off. In 1937, the castle was purchased by a Texan named Bert Williams and converted to the Castle H Swim and Tennis Club, which ironically had a bar in the basement and rooms to let upstairs. It was kind of like a roadhouse, I guess, a little. But at the end of World War II, a neighbor, the Washington Post publisher, Eugene Meyer, was irritated by all the late-night revelry. So he did the expedient thing. He purchased the dilapidated castle and just tore it down. And however, as we're about to see, Mary's other architectural visions have been much more enduring. In the end, Mary's vision for Meridian Hill was underlaid with all the racist and elitist beliefs that characterized the white upper class of her age. And perhaps we can understand her vision as she wanted to create a utopia intended for a very restrictively defined group of citizens who were exactly like herself. While the aesthetic beauty of much of what she created is undeniable, we just can't forget the human cost that it was created at, and also the narrowness of what focusing on architecture without regard to people can bring.
Okay. Let's see here. So I'm going to thank you, Peter, for that. I'm going to move on now and talk a bit about, we're going to kind of do a tour of some of the great mansions that are on Meridian Hill that Mary Henderson built or inspired, and just to give you a flavor of how her legacy remains on 16th Street. This photo that we're starting off with here is from, it's a sort of overhead view looking up 16th from Meridian Hill. Still, the park is still under construction on the right, and the French embassy there is on the left. We'll talk about that in a minute, and some of the other buildings we'll talk about. So Henderson Castle is out of view on the left. It's a little bit more south of this view. Mary Henderson, you know, she had a lot of great ideas. Well, great in her mind anyway. Peter mentioned the executive mansion she wanted built. She also wanted the Lincoln Memorial built on Meridian Hill. And, you know, she didn't succeed in a lot of those, but what she could succeed at was buying property and building houses with her own money. Money talks. This is her legacy. Let's look at, there we go. The first, she started this campaign of just buying properties and building houses on spec, as we would say now, hoping that embassies would take them up. And the first was this one. It used to be called the Pink Palace because it was pink in color. It's now more cream colored. They've repainted it, unfortunately. It was, as it says, they were built in 1906. She paid for it and had it built. It's in this very Venetian Gothic style, the first of several different styles that she would use. And it was did not have a tenant when she built it. The first tenant was Oscar Strauss, President Theodore Roosevelt's Secretary of Commerce and Labor, and he remarked about what beautiful views it was. He thought it was a little bit isolated from the city, so far up the street, but he liked it. Then Delia Spencer Field, the widow of Marshall Field, the Chicago merchant, bought the house and had lavish parties here in the 1920s. And then in 1949, the Inter-American Defense Board bought it and has remained there ever since. That's a group of Latin American top military folks. The house was designed by, how did you fix that one, Peter? There we go, okay. It was designed by this fellow, George Oakley Totten, who sort of became Mary Henderson's official architect, as it were. There's a great caricature of him by Clifford Berryman, the Star's longtime cartoonist. Totten was from New York City. He had been trained at Columbia. He went to Paris and was at the École des Beaux-Arts and came back. 1890s, the height of the Beaux-Arts era. He was the consummate Washington Beaux-Arts architect. And he had the luxury of, in 1898, moving into private practice and specializing in beautiful mansions for wealthy clients. Good work if you can get it. He had worked, in 1902, he had worked on the Boundary Castle embellishments, the most castle-like crenellations on Henderson Castle. And Mary Henderson thought he was great, and so she had him do the Pink Palace and a bunch of other ones, including the French Embassy, which came next. And the French Embassy also, Mary Henderson's property, she built it, she owned it, and she rented it out to France on its completion in 1907. It's a classic French Renaissance style building, a little exuberant. One critic sort of called that tower on the corner, it said it looks like a thermos bottle. And once you get that in your head, then it just doesn't look good anymore. But anyway, it's a beautiful building. One of those houses designed for entertaining. You come in on the ground floor, you get yourself organized, get your coat taken care of, whatever. You go up a marble staircase, and on the second floor is, grand ballroom and dining room, etc. Courtesan oak parquet floors, satin hangings on the walls, etc., etc. So it was a great place for more parties. France was there for a long time. Of course, they were renting it, and here's just a shot of it that looks today. It still looks very similar. It's crowded in by a lot of modern buildings. France stayed there until 1936 when they finally bought their own place, that beautiful mansion in Calorama. I'm sure most everybody knows it. So they moved there, and the house sort of it fell into certainly a less glamorous life. It became a boarding house, had all sorts of different tenants. A certain Church of the Healing Christ used the ambassador's old office as a chapel. It had many tenants. Finally, in 1962, the Embassy of Ghana purchased it and had its embassy there until 1990. And ever since then, the Council of Professional Recognition has been in it. That's a certification group for educators. So it, as I said, it still looks a lot like it did. The next one on the list, built in 1908, has had a little bit of modification, as you might know. So this is sort of the most unfortunate of any of the mansions on Meridian Hill. This was built, also designed by Totten, also built on for Mary Henderson on spec. It's a duplex. It's kind of unusual. A duplex of two mansions that you see there on the left side in this Spanish Renaissance revival style. So here's another style. We have the Venetian, we have the French, now we have the Spanish. It originally was leased out to the Danish and Swedish embassies, as it says there. It had many different embassies renting the building out while it was still there. And on the right side building became the Lithuanian embassy, and still is today. And the left-hand side, as you can see, was unceremoniously torn down in 1965 and replaced with that frankly hideous apartment building. So 1965, that was, before historic preservation. This, fortunately, we can say this never would happen today, right? I mean, but it did. All right, enough commiserating on that. If you move up the street, the next one we'll look at here is the Polish embassy, 1910. This was the last of the first phase of Mary Henderson's exuberant building of embassy-like buildings. And as it says, it was built in 1910. It sat built and vacant for years, for almost 10 years. In 1919, the new state of Poland, one of the new countries that had been established after World War I, bought it and occupied it as their embassy. And they've been there ever since. And perhaps, I don't have any written evidence of this, but perhaps because it took so long to dispose of this building, may have been a reason why Mary took a pause on building new houses for a while. But Poland, as I said, has been here ever since. It was here the independent Polish government remained in exile, remained in the building during World War II, even though Poland was overrun by Germany. Here's where, for example, in 1941, the body of John Paderewski, the famous pianist and former premier of Poland, laid in rest at this building. As I said, Mary took a pause after this. We'll look at a couple other nearby buildings. The Cuban embassy, this wasn't built by Mary Henderson. She sold the site to Cuba, and they hired the firm of McNeil and McNeil to build this embassy. You would not think, if you didn't know otherwise, that it was a Cuban embassy. Everyone expected a wonderful Spanish building with stucco walls and Spanish tiled roof and everything. And the Cubans were quite adamant that they did not want a building that looked like their former overlords owned it. So they deliberately chose a style here, English or French Renaissance revival style, for their new embassy. Nevertheless, they were still Cubans, and they had the best parties in the 1920s. Everybody said they were the best ones. They have a big garden in back, and they hired a 21-piece orchestra just to play Latin music for people to dance to. Gloria Vanderbilt danced at parties here. This was the place to be in the 1920s. And of course, it's remained in Cuba's hands ever since. Spent many years being officially the Cuban interest section of the Swiss embassy, but and then in the Obama administration, of course, it became officially again the Cuban embassy. Next down, let's take a look at the Italian embassy, which is just a little ways up, 1925. This was another one, the second one I'm going to talk about that wasn't the Mary Henderson embassy. This was actually designed by the New York firm of Warren and Wetmore, very prestigious, famous architects, designers of Grand Central Station in New York City. And a very distinguished embassy building. Maybe slightly, if you think about them, it's slightly less eccentric than some of the George Oakley Totten buildings that Mary Henderson sponsored. The Italian embassy, of course, they're through thick and thin, including the Mussolini years, the years of World War II. The story, it goes right after Pearl Harbor in 1941, a couple days later. Someone was seen bringing in cans of gasoline in the front door of the embassy, and then reporters gathered and watched smoke billowing out of the chimneys as they burned all of their records before leaving the embassy. So it was quite dramatic. And the Polish embassy is just across Fuller Street next door. They very thoughtfully brought out vodka for the reporters to drink while they were watching. So similar. It's now expensive, very expensive apartments. The Italians were here again through, as I said, a long time, through sort of the difficult years of the 60s and 70s when the area was not as safe as it is now. The Italian ambassador in April 1969 was mugged in Meridian Hill Park on his way home one day, and that began a long process for the embassy to look for a new home, which they eventually bought an ambassador's home, the elegant Firenze House in Forest Hills in 1976, and then they moved the Chancery finally in 2000, so that took a long time. And then after that, this embassy was through a long process of review for historic preservation. It was preserved and turned into apartments that just opened in 2018. We'll just do a couple more. I know we're taking a long time, and I'm probably overstaying my welcome. Let's cross the street. There we go. And look at the Spanish embassy. So Mary Henderson had a little sort of surge again, or second phase, if you will, of mansion building on 16th Street. And one was this building, which became the Spanish embassy, built in 1921. There's another wonderful George Oakley Totten kind of exuberant and eclectic design building. Mary Henderson built it as a kind of a memorial for her late husband and her son, John Henderson Jr., who had just died at age 52. And it was built in 1921, and it did not have any immediate takers. It's lovely, but it's eccentric. And in 1923, she decided to offer it to the United States as the official home of the Vice President. And First Lady Florence Harding was said to have been totally enraged by this idea, exclaiming, "Do you think I'm going to have those Coolidges living in a house like that? A hotel apartment is plenty good enough for them." So the
Hotel apartment's plenty good enough for them.
The Coolidges did not get to live here. They were living at the Willard, in an apartment at the Willard, and the Senate committee in charge of such matters politely declined Mary's offer. So the house stood empty for several more years. In 1927, Spain purchased it as its embassy, and really decorated it beautifully. If you've ever been inside, here's a photo of the patio where they put Spanish tile and so forth, and it's just a beautiful place. So Spain also obviously was here for many years. The government still owns the building. It's now a cultural institute. It's open. You can go tour it. I mentioned that the Italian ambassador getting mugged in 1969. Well, another story is about the Spanish ambassador living here in 1972. He was to attend with his wife a party at the Italian embassy, which is directly across the street. So they got in their car and their chauffeur drove them across the street, so they didn't have to actually walk outside at night on 16th Street in 1972. That was 1972. So Spain was here. Again, they eventually also bought a new ambassador's residence in 1989 and a new chancery in 1994. And as I said, this is the Cultural Institute. I will finish up with, I'm not mentioning every single building. There are about 3 or 4 that Mary Henderson built that I don't have time for, but I'll finish with this one. This is sometimes called Embassy Building Number 10 by architects, and because it's the 10th of Mary Henderson's mansions. It's just up the street at Lamont Street. It's, again, another beautiful, eccentric George Oakley Totten mansion. This French Renaissance revival style, but with those, you know, Gothic windows, you know, that actually have little flying buttresses on them, which is quite unique and distinctive. This was built in 1930. This was the year before Mary Henderson died, so it was her last project. The building, like some of these others, stood vacant for several years. Was converted to a boarding house, and then in 1943, the DC government bought it as headquarters of the Department of Recreation, which stayed there until 2012. And the building is now is going to be renovated for use by a nonprofit. So that's the last. Again, there are others I don't have time for, but I can answer questions about. And again, here's the book, which is available. And you know, we didn't really talk about it. We sort of launched into the Mary Henderson because she's such a dynamic person and so central to the street. But the book is full of the whole history of 16th Street and many, many stories that we don't have time to share today. But in any event, thank you very much, and we'll answer questions. Any questions from anyone?
140.
I have to be somewhere at 2:45.
I have something you all could discuss. I know that north of K Street, or maybe a couple M Street, there are no commercial buildings, I believe, on 16th Street. So what was the genesis of that? I mean, was that later determined, or what eliminated commercial properties?
Yeah, that came very early. 1905, there was a survey done. I don't know who, it could have been the Hendersons that were behind it, I don't know. But it was a survey of owners and property owners on 16th did not want commercial buildings. And they enacted an early regulation. 16th Street was probably the first street that was zoned, if you will. This was before, the Zoning Act didn't happen until 1920. That was the first citywide zoning scheme, which memorialized that 16th Street would not have commercial buildings on it. It was slightly adjusted in the 1940s to allow office buildings on the lower part, below M or thereabouts. But that was like a very limited exception. There was supposed to be no signs, no neon, none of that stuff on 16th. And so yeah, to this day it's all residential or non-commercial. Yes.
Me?
Yeah,
so maybe you can validate something. I had heard a long time ago that early geographers in the United States had to determine the prime meridian of the world. And 16th Street was an early designation of the prime meridian before it was established universally with other countries. And I wonder if you know anything about that.
Can you repeat the question for everybody?
Okay. Yeah, the question was about a prime meridian going through 16th Street. Was there ever one, and why and how? And yes, Thomas Jefferson decided that there should be an American meridian. There should be an American everything, right? So we're not going to have somebody else's. We're not going to use some British meridian. So he set this meridian to go through 16th Street because that's going through the White House. It's a straight northern meridian. The trouble is, of course, that you can't just, the old saying, the great thing about standards is there's so many of them. That's sort of the deal here. The American meridian just never took off. The British meridian, because Britain dominated the seas and all international traffic, obviously that became the standard, and so the American meridian was given up. But there was a marker marking that meridian, and that's why Meridian Hills has got its name.
Yeah, good. When I was a child, in outer 16th Street, each tree was dedicated to someone to a soldier who had died in the First World War. And I could answer this simply by going out there, but let me ask you, are those stones, those memorial stones, still there?
Actually, this pertains to something Cindy was talking about earlier, about the memorial, I think the commemorative walk, you call it. It was a sad story that I think now we can say has become a happy one. Originally, it was there were Norway maples with markers established for every casualty from the district in World War I. And over the years, the traffic took a toll on them. A lot of the stones disappeared. The trees got hit by cars. They died off, and pretty much had become a shadow of itself, really, till about 10 years ago. And now, I believe, from what Cindy was saying, there's been a movement to reestablish them. And I believe you're having a walk this year, is that correct?
There's a wayside
marker
that is there. Is Barbara Bates here?
No, she's not here.
No, she's not here. Okay, well, and would you like to answer?
I'll go off on a tangent, but to answer your question, there are only I believe three of the, what we'll just call stumps of the original 530 markers. There were 499 and some others were added later after other casualties were identified. So as of today, snooping around on 16th Street or just driving along and spotting one out of the corner of our eye or tripping over one, there are basically only 3 of those 530 left. None of them intact. You can sort of see where the copper or bronze plates or emblems were attached to them, but those don't exist. The only one that exists intact is in Phil Mendelssohn's office. It was saved. John Kelly from the Washington Post came across it in one of his readers' backyards, who had been on a construction project for one of the widenings of 16th Street, and preserved or stole this marker. And I guess this guy had some guilty feelings about it or something, or wrote John Kelly and said, hey, what's this thing in my backyard? And sure enough, John went out there and it found its final resting place in the Wilson building. And I think it's still in Mendelssohn's, Mendelssohn's office. So that's on our website. If you go to AOI's website, all that 16th Street tree memorial and the wayside that we dedicated this past May at the corner of 16th and Alaska Avenue. And it has a map where all the original markers were, and it has a list of all the names of all the people memorialized there. So that's right at the corner of 16th and Alaska Avenue. Last I checked. I drive by there periodically to make sure it hasn't been, vandalized. It is there. Thank you, Dolores.
The lady there in the purple sweater who's been trying to ask a question.
Oh, yes. Here you go, Jane.
I grew up hearing that 16th Street was called the Gold Coast. Did Mary Henderson create that slogan? No.
No, she didn't. I believe it's really more of a post-World War II term for the later developing sections further out, more towards Silver Spring at that end.
Yeah, to add to that, the Gold Coast, there's other cities also have Gold Coasts that are African American wealthy neighborhoods, and we had on 16th Street not just relatively wealthy, not just the Gold Coast, but even a Platinum Coast at the very top of it, right? So,
yes.
It was, and still is a great neighborhood of well-to-do African Americans mostly, not entirely, but mostly.
I am the
Here, Dolores.
proud founder of what is called the 16th Street Heights Civic Association. And we had a problem, it's not that large, but we had a problem years ago with churches. Those big houses being converted into churches, and also they were cutting the curbs and driving and parking right in the yard of those places. We did what was called an overlay, and we fought City Hall and everybody else, and we were able to get some of them closed and restore them back to
what they were intended for in the beginning, and that was residential living. And I worked there hard on it, that's why I look so old today.
About what you said about commercial buildings. I remember when between H and K, or whatever it was called, the Christian Science Monitor was there, but now there seems to be a commercial building. And then on between K and L, I used to live near L, right across the Russian embassy for a while. And I remember, and my husband worked there. And so when he was invited to the Russian embassy, I remember FBI came after him to find out why. And this was many years ago. Now I don't understand. All the way up there are commercial buildings. But between K and L, you cannot have those signs. Yeah, but I don't understand.
Yeah, that was, so the basic non-commercial rule zoning from 1920 that actually went back to 1905, that was modified just in a limited way in 1940, I think 1947. And it said it allowed office buildings. So as you said, there's office buildings. The third church, which should have been preserved, nevertheless is gone, is replaced by an office building. That's consistent with that 1947 zoning rule. But they can't have, you can't put in a shopping mall, you can't have big signs on the street, you can't have, you can't have retail stores, at least not new ones. And so then somebody will say, well, but isn't there a little corner market on 16th and, what is it, T? And that's, you know, the old, previously standing commercial businesses were grandfathered in. So that one was actually there originally before 1905, and now it's of course falling down. But there's very few exceptions, and they were grandfathered in the exceptions. The few exceptions that exist.
No, not really. Just to say that there were a few of the hotels and apartment buildings had commercial establishments inside them, but you know they didn't have signs outside or anything, and I think those have mostly gone away.
At the Jefferson Hotel there.
Yeah, that's one.
Yeah, quickly, I wanted to say that you saw the duplex there, that it was torn down.
Nelson, use the microphone. Nelson, use the microphone that he's handing.
The duplex that was shown, turn it on, is it on? The duplex that was shown and was torn down, it was mentioned, oh, this wouldn't happen today because of the historic preservation laws. Well, there's a big loophole in the historic preservation law that you can have a special merit designation. So we might consider, when the building heights comes up before Congress, to actually advocate that lower heights be recommended for certain parts of the city. And maybe 16th Street would be one area. So let's think maybe lower building height permits in some areas too, not just raising them. Thank you.
Yes, we could just very briefly add that the third church, which was what the Christian Science Monitor office building was part of, it was a complex. It was a church as well as a plaza. And the office building was a landmark that was torn down under one of those exemptions. This one was about the economic hardship to the congregation. So yeah, there are definitely ways in which people can appeal to the mayor's agent under, you know, some fairly strict criteria to get permission to demolish the landmark building. We do need to acknowledge that.
Any one last question? Before I'm sure they will be inundated at the back of the room with other questions. I see one.
Yeah, I'm sorry to be the second question, but I'm looking at that picture and I see three enormous churches. It's a Mormon church on the left, All Saints Unitarian on the right, and I don't know, I think it's a Methodist church on the left. Was Mary Henderson at all involved in getting these churches put up?
Well, yes, she was. And actually, I'll very briefly tell you a story that shows the more tolerant side of Mary Henderson, which was that in about 1920, a delegation from the Church of Latter-day Saints, led by Senator Smoot from Utah, came to call on her. And Mary was selling off land at that point if she liked, your cause or your, what you were going to do with it. She was willing to do that. And they told her, well, we would like to build a national church for the Church of Latter-day Saints in Washington and have a presence here. And we would like to buy your land on Meridian Hill to do that. Quite soon after that, Mary got a visit from, I believe it was her architect, Totten, and a delegation of ministers who said, do not sell to them. We don't want them here. They're not, I believe some of the ministers said they're not Christian, in our opinion. They're a cult, in our opinion. If you let them in, you're going to wreck the neighborhood. Don't do it. Well, Mary did it. And you see the beautiful Mormon chapel is built there at 16th and Columbia. It's an exquisite building. It's now owned by the Unification Church. It was, till they built, just about till they built, they built other Mormon houses of worship in Washington, till they built the big cathedral in Silver Spring. But it was an interesting story. We don't know, but we think, for one thing, I think she was probably flattered by having a senator call on her as, the widow of a senator. And another thing was she probably really kind of subscribed to the, certainly endorsed the idea of being alcohol, caffeine, tobacco-free as the Mormon Church. And I think those may have given them a bit of an in. But it does, it does show a certain broad-mindedness on her part that maybe we don't see in other places. John, you know a little more about the other two.
That's she sold land. The Unitarian Church that you mentioned, which is the second from the left, that was Henderson land that she sold to the Unitarians. I don't know of the one on the far left is the National Baptist Church, and I don't know whether that was originally Henderson property or not.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. Some appreciation for both John. Thank you. And for Peter. As they were discussing with us before, as we were sitting at the table, their research is not only extensive in the factual research, but the photographic research as well. So take a look at the book. There are fabulous photos that are in there, and I'm sure that they will be happy to sign it back. And please come back. Your next research, both of you, please come back. Thank you so much. Two last pieces of information before we adjourn. One, I want to give a short update on Tom Neal, our past president, Tom Neal, who is doing very well in rehab. He had an illness and a setback earlier or late last year, but he does seem to be progressing very well, and hopefully will be home soon. So we're sending our thoughts to him as well. There is an event that some of you may be interested in. It's going to be here at the club. It is called Songs of Freedom, Journeying the Underground Railroad. It is commemorating Harriet Tubman's 200th birthday. It's going to be Tuesday, February 8th at 6:30 p.m. And it is a musical. February 28th. Did I say 8th?
Yeah.
February 28th. No, it's upcoming for it. So there are some flyers, I think, in the back if you're interested in coming, and certainly it's connected to Black History Month, one of the ways to go ahead and commemorate that as well. Was that an update on something? No? Okay. Thank you so much for being with us today. Our next program is going to be back here in March. Look for the newsletter, look for the email. And we will be celebrating where we are. Women's National Democratic Club. It is their 100th anniversary this year. So we will be finding out not only about the history of the club and the building, but we will be speaking with Anna Fierst, who is a past president, as well as great-granddaughter of Eleanor and FDR Roosevelt. So we will be getting some insights from her about politics in Washington, as well as the history of the club itself. So please join us for that. Thank you. Have a safe trip home, and we hope to see you next month.
Yeah, nice.